Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Paul Donaher, and I'm the Director of Global Growth here at Radius. And thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar, which will be on the subject of partnering for impact and how to best leverage mixed methodological approaches for optimal outcomes. The webinar today will be a discussion between Erica Pondillo, who's Vice President of Client Services here at Radius, and Ronnie Matthew, Senior Manager within the Strategy and Insights Group at Nestlé Purina. The webinar is scheduled for a maximum of 45 minutes, and if you'd like to ask a question of Erica and Ronnie, please type it into the software. I'll be keeping a note of that as we go, and we'll leave hopefully 10 or 15 minutes at the end where I can take some of your questions and pose it to Erica and Ronnie. By way of introduction, so today's webinar will be going over a lot of ground, but hopefully you'll come away with an enhanced understanding of a couple of things in particular. So the impact of a range of research phases and approaches, and why combining different methods results in well-rounded, actionable insights. The role of a trusted partnership and why that's so important, and how collaboration can lead to stronger research methodologies and better outcomes. And the magic of what we'll call 1 and 1 equaling 3, when we combine the expertise of both supplier and client side teams and bring our own unique points of view and thoughts and experiences, the greater is the sum of the parts. So finally, just to give you an introduction to Erica and Ronnie, and then they'll take it away. Erica, as I said, is a VP here at Radius, joined the business in 2008, leads a team of analysts and helps existing and new clients tackle challenging business issues through smartly designed research plans. Erica's experience is both in qual and quant techniques, going across a whole range of B2C and B2B industries, and across a whole different range of sectors: CPG, food and bev, fashion and beauty, retail, toys, children's merchandise, media, and communication services. She's recently been a guest speaker at Women in Research Wire to present our approach to storytelling through data visualization. And Erica holds a BS in marketing from Fairfield University. Ronnie is a very highly experienced strategy, shopper, and consumer insights leader, and has particular experience in CPG and retail spaces, particularly with three brands that I'll mention: Purina, Unilever, and Mayer. He's worked on a number of flagship brands such as ProPlan, Purina One, Dove, and Axe, and has worked across the US, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. In his current role at Nestlé Purina Pet Care, Ronnie supports the company's emerging business areas and spearheads consumer strategy and insights. He focuses on developing innovative products and services that unlock avenues for consumer engagement and foster the brand loyalty that I can certainly speak for myself, that me and my pets have for some of those brands that I mentioned. And so with that, Erica will kick us off.
Great, thank you, Paul. All right, let's dig right in. Many of us already rely on a range of research approaches to deliver more comprehensive insights, and that's because when we only use one method, whether that's numbers or narratives, we often miss the full picture. Traditionally, we might lean on a combo of quantitative and qualitative methods to capture the what and also the why. Mixed methods allow us to validate hypotheses, uncover hidden insights, and address business questions in a more complete manner. Of course, it's not necessary to leverage multiple approaches just for the sake of doing so. Ronnie, tell us about how you typically evaluate whether to apply a single versus a mixed approach.
Yeah, that's a great question, Erica. I would say it depends on a few factors. So some of the things I consider are timing, cost, is the research transactional and tactical, such as late-stage concept tests, or is it foundational where we need to unpack the whys and need a full spectrum of consumer viewpoints? A single method approach is great when the risk is low, when we're looking for a quick turnaround, or when we're trying to make a go, no-go decisions based on some key KPIs that organizations have. Or when we want to A/B test, that's another example. So these are instances when I tend to use a single approach. I've also used a single approach in early stage research when the direction is somewhat set and the scope is very narrow. To your question about when it comes to mixed methods, I tend to lean into it when the scope is broad, or when it's very critical for me to understand the lived experience of the consumer, versus, let's say, just to learn about what they think or feel about an issue. Another example that comes to mind would be where we know consumers say one thing, but do something completely different. That's when a layered approach might work better. But we know employing mixed methods can be protracted and expensive, and it's resource intensive. That's a reality. So it's not uncommon for us to rely on a single methodology when conducting research. And the fact of the matter is the amount of research that we do is substantial, and the cost can add up.
Yeah, that's an important point. And it's also a good reason for us to consider mixing in agile techniques like AI-powered tools, or tap into the vast amount of digital data available by capturing and analyzing online behavioral data. In addition to tried and true mixed methods like focus groups and an online survey, today's modern toolkit has so much more to offer. And as a custom market research organization, we know it's critical to incorporate technology that's going to make processes faster, more efficient, and more insightful. But with the vast number of options, it can be challenging to navigate. How does this compare to your experience on the client side? And what's your approach to adopting new techniques?
So let me share my personal experience before I answer that question. It might provide better context. So on average, I receive, I'd say at least like one vendor outreach per week, and usually it's about a new research solution. These are very important interactions, by the way, to have for me as a client. But as a client, it can be incredibly challenging to assess the true value of these new solutions, because more often than not, I find many of these solutions, they serve the same purpose. They are like old wine in a new bottle. While the approach may sound innovative, when I take a closer look, I often find that they do not provide any deeper understanding of the consumer than the techniques we already have in our toolkit. So my approach to adopting new techniques is I always start with one question. Will this method help me get a deeper understanding of the phenomenon that I'm investigating compared to the existing techniques that I already use? Or will it help me understand my consumers at a deeper level? To me, it is less about the solution and approach, while they're extremely important, but it's more about the outcome. So will the new technique lead to a better outcome? That's something that I always think about.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as research partners, we're always looking to help you achieve those deeper insights and avoid redundant efforts. So what's the approach you take to analyzing whether something will lead to a unique perspective or outcome?
So my approach to research, to be honest, has really evolved significantly over the years. Recently, I've been using a hub and spoke approach in my research. Think of hub as the research question, and spokes are the tools that we use to answer those research questions. So what this approach enables is it allows us to investigate a research question, but from different angles, effectively minimizing biases in both consumer responses and also potential methodological biases. And as researchers, I mean, we know that is something that we have to factor in. We all deal with biases, and the goal really is to kind of minimize those biases. And a hub and spoke approach is an effective way of minimizing that. In the past, I would say my approach has been more linear. Even when I've used mixed methodologies, for instance, I might end a qualitative phase, use findings from that phase to inform certain decisions, and then proceed to a quantitative phase to make additional decisions. A linear approach, I feel, tends to focus on seeking consumer consensus than identifying consumer contradictions, which I think is a very different mindset.
Yeah, I would completely agree. In fact, Radius has developed a framework that helps to establish a 360-degree view to understanding consumers. So it's similar to the hub and spoke approach that you spoke about. It leverages multidimensional methodology to help more fully understand consumer practices, attitudes, and sentiments to gain inspiration for innovation and marketing. To do this, we rely on an assortment of approaches, one being AI-powered ethnography to understand your target audience in a more natural online environment. To this, we might also perform an audit of client database information and secondary research available. And by coupling primary quant or qual initiatives with approaches like AI ethnography and existing knowledge, we're able to identify both consumer consensus and contradictions, since you're looking at the issue from multiple angles. So how do you tend to think about the existence of contradictions that are uncovered using a nonlinear approach?
Yeah, so there's this quote that I love. Consumers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. This quote, I think, is attributed to David Ogilvy. And I'll give you an example from my personal life just to illustrate the point. Let's talk about my food philosophy. Just humor me for a minute. I'm someone who prioritizes simple, real ingredients, clean eating, organic foods. I prepare meals from scratch, exercise on a regular basis. If I were to participate in a quantitative or a qual study, I'll most likely be described as a clean eater or a health nut. But I'm also known to wolf down a 10-piece bucket of KFC chicken, original recipe. Those are very true contradictory facts about me. And as consumers, we all are consumers at the end of the day. As consumers, we are full of contradictions. So it's this inconsistency that necessitates the need to engage with consumers using different tools and approaches. By diversifying our methods, we can gain a more comprehensive understanding of the issues at hand, I feel. Ultimately, it leads to better decision making. So when we delve deeper into consumers' lived experiences, we realize that they're full of contradictions. Yet as researchers, we, for some reason, tend to focus on consensus. It's important to acknowledge that it's okay to have conflicting consumer viewpoints. In fact, capturing these conflicts and contradictions in consumer opinions should be the very purpose of consumer research. In my opinion, deep and meaningful insights lie in understanding these contradictions. As researchers, we need to be more comfortable moving from a consensus-seeking mindset to a contradiction-seeking mindset.
Okay, so we're seeking out contradictions and inviting in the unexpected. What could go wrong there? But kidding aside, should we share a real-world example of how our research led to unexpected learning that had a significant impact on the action taken?
Absolutely, absolutely. So recently, our teams partnered on a significant business challenge that we were facing. We decided to adopt the hub and spoke approach to tackle it. The approach involved leveraging three distinct methodologies. The first approach involved behavioral analysis using web analytics, and we did this to understand what people were doing online, looking at their behavior. The second approach involved a survey of website visitors. And in the third approach, it involved, again, another survey, but this time we were targeting a specific segment of buyers that we often engage with. We deployed these approaches at the same time, approaching the same question, but from three different angles. Each method offered a unique opportunity to understand our audience and their behaviors. What was interesting as we dove into the data, we found something unexpected. There was contradictory information coming from two of our sources. And if you recall, this is not something we had anticipated or even hypothesized. It prompted us to pause, reflect on our findings. And as we investigated further, we realized our business was in fact addressing two completely different audiences without fully understanding the nuances of each. So this was this revelation was pivotal for us. And the reason I bring that up is, I think had we approached this research in a linear fashion, we would have risked getting a monochromatic view. But because we approached the question from three different angles, we were able to challenge our assumptions and broaden our understanding of our audience. This really ignited additional discussions within my organization.
You mentioned igniting additional discussions within your organization. I imagine that these discussions, which stem from unexpected learning, may not always be easy to have. When they're ingoing hypotheses, especially if they're shared by a stakeholder group, you could easily find yourself in a position of defense. And what you really are looking for is an open-minded mentality to interpret and reconcile the information together. In my experience, I find it helps to bring a couple of different supporting factors to these types of conversations. The first is additional data points. So from primary or secondary sources that support the unexpected learning. This helps establish validation from a factual point of view. The second is a wider, more macro level perspective, such as external factors that consumers are dealing with, like delights or tensions. And this helps ground us in the reality that the world around us can impact our behaviors and attitudes. So together, supporting factors help facilitate a productive conversation that will resonate with stakeholders more effectively. And so to further ensure that these discussions are successful, it's helpful to minimize surprise, right? By serving up key information at various points throughout the project life cycle. This allows the audience to absorb and think about the learning in small steps that build upon each other rather than a potential overload of information. And this can be particularly useful when there are multiple phases or approaches, like we've been discussing today. Ronnie, would it be fair to say that having a partner to help socialize unexpected information and facilitate productive conversations is something you welcome?
Totally. And I mean, I'll say Radius has been a critical part of this process for me. Working alongside partners like yourself and the entire Radius team, you guys bring fresh thinking. We uncovered valuable insights that not only informed our strategies, but also deepened our understanding of our consumer. In all of this, I feel collaboration is key. Let's not forget, it's also collaboration that makes the methodology design phase of research a co-creation process.
That's a perfect term, co-creation. We recently co-created a methodology to unpack a niche but growing source of pet acquisition. We designed multiple phases of qual using both AI-led chats as well as personal interviews by a professional insight strategist to address the issue, so combining a new tool with a traditional method. And I'd say this required a little bit of openness from both of us. The intent was to be able to collect qual insights at scale while also capturing meaningful and deep information. And it did very well. But there was an element of unknown in using this new technology, and we recognized and decided, it's worth embracing because we would learn from the process regardless of the outcome. We learned about the strengths and some limitations of this methodology, and we identified ways to optimize it for future use. And I think that mentality serves as a basis for growth. What I mean by this is, for both clients and suppliers alike, there can be a wall of hesitation that blocks growth in the service of assured success. And I feel that we've built a relationship where we feel comfortable bringing fresh ideas to the table for consideration in the spirit of elevating our work.
Yes, and if I may add, I'll add that a good relationship also means being able to push each other to think critically, question our assumptions, continue to refine as we go through the process. I'd like to share an example of how this co-creation process allowed us to question assumptions that we made about our consumer and really helped us uncover new insights. You mentioned pet acquisition. So the past few years, we've been seeing changes in the pet acquisition journey, which we had been tracking for years through different surveys. And we were fairly confident that we knew what was driving the shift in consumer behavior. And there was also alignment across the organization on those insights. So this should have been an ideal situation, right? Confidence in the inside, alignment across the organization. There was no reason to rock the boat. But this new approach that we co-created uncovered some contradictory information. As we continued to explore the question, new information emerged that I would say that added more context to what was really happening. And this information allowed us to revise our hypotheses, uncover aspects of the pet acquisition journey that I'd say we might not have uncovered through a more traditional process. And we were able to, take that risk because of the trust that the two teams, we have built over time.
Yeah, and I would also add that information sharing between client and suppliers is another key to success. Over time and with a consistent team, we've built a foundational knowledge base of your category and your business. We strive to understand your strategic goals and ensure that the insights we share are going to support the broader vision. And this is possible because of the generous amount of time you invest in sharing information with us, as if we were an extension of your team.
That's really kind of you. You mentioned information sharing. I couldn't agree more. I feel it is a vital ingredient in any successful client-supplier partnership. As researchers, whether we're on the client side or the supplier side, we all have access to the same tools, all the same tools, techniques, methodologies, and we might also be talking to the same set of consumers. And I bet there's a good chance we might also be asking the same questions that we asked 2 years ago. So if that is the case, how do we generate truly meaningful insights? This is where I feel information sharing plays such an important role. On the client side, I have the advantage of knowing more about the consumer, more about the category, about the business than any supplier, right? That's a privilege as an advantage I have being on the client side. I sit on a wealth of legacy insights about the consumer and about the category. So when I start a new project, I always aim to build on this institutional knowledge and avoid rehashing what my business partners already know. I mean, I've been in this company for 11 years. I work with business partners who have been in this company for longer, and they know a lot about the category. And that's why information sharing is so important. As much as I can, I try to bring my supplier up to speed on that institutional knowledge, so we're not rehashing what the organization already knows. And I feel where this approach really shines is when we are working together, let's say to articulate the research question, having that institutional knowledge in the rearview mirror, I feel really helps us focus on uncovering insights that is truly new and nuanced. And that's why investing the time up front in sharing information with a supplier, I believe, is so critical. In my experience, the other advantage to that approach is that it makes the supplier more knowledgeable and it enables them to ask better questions. And something that's extremely important to me, it allows them to challenge my assumptions.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, you are extremely generous with your time, and it's because we have experienced the value that it adds to the work we do together. For others listening in who may not have as established relationships with a supplier partner, I imagine that investing time to knowledge share may feel somewhat less advantageous, but there are ways to go about it that don't overburden one party or the other. So for example, as new information is socialized within a client organization, consider adding your supplier partner to the distribution list, obviously as relevant and appropriate. But this helps reduce the time required at the start of a new project because the supplier is keeping pace versus requiring a lengthy point in time knowledge audit. Another tip is to share bite-sized information on standing meetings and conversations. If you have scheduled time together, set aside a few minutes at the end of those conversations to provide a brief update on a particular topic or discuss industry-related news or developments. And as a wrap-up, we hope that sharing our experiences inspires you to maximize your partnerships. Here's a recap of what we hope you will walk away with today. When you have a high-stakes topic to unpack, take a hub and spoke or a 360-degree approach. By diversifying your methods, you gain more comprehensive understanding of the issues at hand and ultimately lead to better decision-making. Remember Ronnie's favorite quote and seek out consumer contradictions. It's okay to have conflicting information. In fact, capturing conflicts and contradictions of consumer opinions should be the very purpose of consumer research. Recognize that deep insights come from understanding contradictions. Bring your stakeholders along with this mentality and facilitate productive discussions that resonate using external proof points and macro level context. Limit surprises and share information that builds upon each other in stages. And give methodology co-creation a try. Be comfortable bringing in new approaches to the table for consideration in the spirit of elevating your work together. And finally, invest in knowledge sharing. It makes your partners more informed and enables them to ask better questions, build on existing knowledge, and think critically about the application of the research.
Excellent. Erica, Ronnie, thank you. And there are a number of questions, folks, that have come through. I may, as I do in these, if I see questions that are fairly similar, I might try and combine them a little bit. A few people are asking a question which I think comes from a kind of segmentation standpoint, in that everybody accepts their consumer contradictions. Should we still try to build segments and profiles and understand our audience when there are so many contradictions? And how should we look at segment? Now, what you guys are necessarily not talking about is segmentation here, and I don't think there's anything that you have said that would dissuade me from doing a segmentation study, but it's an interesting topic when there are so many contradictions and you're thinking about different segments that you might want to reach out to. Does that have any implications for how we think about our audiences and our communications to them? Ronnie or Erica, feel free to, either of you, to jump in on that one.
Yeah, I could start. Ronnie, it makes me think of the case study that you went over in uncovering two different audiences that you didn't actually think about in two different ways. You thought it was more of a homogeneous audience, and we found that there were actually two distinctive audiences in the research that we conducted. You know, potentially, had we done a segmentation type of study, that might have come through in that type of research. And I think that absolutely segmentation still plays a very important role, and uncovering the nuances within a larger audience is still going to be a very important initiative. And I don't think this sort of replaces that in any way.
Yeah, I'll just build on that, Erica. That's a great question. I don't think they're contradictory at all. You know, you need segmentation because you need a target, right? You just can't be targeting, you know, your everyone. So segmentation allows us to do that, but what this approach allows us is really to understand those nuances, those contradictory, you know, facts about the segment. So I'll just give you an example. I brought this earlier in when I was talking about contradictory points, you know, in my own life. Now, if let's say Burger King were to look at my attitude, right, they would say, "Oh, I'm not going to target Ronnie because he's a health nut." But the fact of the matter is that I also eat KFC, right? Or KFC might say, "Oh, I'm not going to target Ronnie because, you know, he's a health nut. So I'm just going to avoid that person." So I think there are contradictions, and a hub and spoke approach, really understanding those contradictions, really help us understand when to target. It's not if to target, but it's when to target and how to target. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I do actually have a terrific question to finish up with here that Felicia has just put up. Felicia, I'm not going to ask that. I'll ask that at the end. A couple more questions. Curious about the number of single methodology versus mixed methodological studies you're seeing when you talk about outcomes from different methods. Would you say that you're seeing more mixed methods types of situations and methodological opportunities versus single methods than before, and how might you see that playing out in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel the mix has changed for sure. Especially, I mean, I can speak, to my organization. After we embraced agile tools, even recently with AI being used in research, we've been running pilots and experiments, and I feel we're conducting more mixed method studies now than we were before. It has not completely replaced single method approach, which I feel is important, has an important place in research. And I'm not advocating that we move away from single methods research. And the other thing is, I feel it's much easier now than ever before to incorporate mixed methods, into our research, because it's gotten more cost effective and faster. But there's, of course, a time and place for each approach. And as for the second question, how do I see that playing out in the future? I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I would say my personal view is that AI is a game changer. The amount of data that we're able to process through AI tools, be it behavioral, attitudinal, trends data, these are exciting times to be an insight professional. And I see more of mixed methods being used in the future because of all these technological changes that we're seeing. Erica, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I echo that completely. With the proliferation of AI-powered methods, I think the need for a human-led counterpart method is going to be really important for confidence in the findings and the depth of learning. Again, meaning that mixed methods are likely to be very common in the near future.
Appreciate that, guys. One that's kind of related almost to the first question, and it's inconsistencies that you see in respondent feedback, and you see it too said here. Curious if you have any tips on how to best handle that with your stakeholders. They might not be expecting that, or they want research to provide some more definitive direction, and they want research to provide consensus. Any tips on how to best deal with internal stakeholders who might have that point of view?
Yeah, I could take that. I think it's helpful to consider the stakeholder or audience's style of learning and decision making. Will more data points gain their confidence, or will it be helpful to take a step back and think about macro level or external factors that may be contributing to what you're seeing? Probably a bit of both. And I go back to something we spoke about today, which is that consumer inconsistencies are all truths. And it's our job to make sense of how they coexist. And yes, sometimes that will require more research to get clarity. I don't know, Ronnie, if you had anything to add.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is I think that is such an important, really question to think through as a researcher, because this is beyond research, right? This is how do you present the findings in a way that is meaningful and actionable to stakeholders. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. I think you really need to understand your stakeholders. But one thing I try to do as much as I can is to create a core team of stakeholders, be it could be just one business partner or two, depending on how large your team is, that can react to the insights, ask questions before the broader share out. Because they might ask questions that I've not thought about, and we might have the answer in our research, And it just gives us time to take those additional questions, build it into the final deck. And the other thing I'll add is if you're working in a fast-moving category or a segment, I've seen business questions evolve during the course of fieldwork. And so bringing that new business questions early on really helps manage those unknowns.
One other question here, folks. You talked about collaboration. We agree that's key. What are best practices in achieving the ideal collaboration between supplier and client? You guys touched on that a little bit, but any best practices that you call out?
Yeah, personally, I take the approach of we're in this together. Your success is our success. And having worked on the client side myself, I know the importance, Ronnie, you were just speaking about this, I know the importance of engaging end users of the research from the onset, speaking with them up front about what success looks like to them, and then being flexible, fine-tune plans as necessary to better address the needs, socialize the learning at key intervals throughout the project. Those types of things really allow for builds and iterations along the way that ultimately lead to outcomes stakeholders can get behind because they were part of the process.
Ronnie, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I think you've covered it all. I think those are some of the key things that I would recommend as well. Keeping in the back of the mind as you.
I do have one last question, and this is what I've mentioned before for Felicia. Not related at all to anything. What are your dogs' names, Erica?
Well, we've got Leroy on the bottom right and Steven on the top left. And they were adopted from Pet Finder, and I highly recommend Pet Finder if you're looking for your next pet.
Got it. Well, listen, Ronnie, Erica, thank you so much for presenting this webinar today. Very enjoyable. Folks, thanks for your questions and also for your participation today. Our next webinar will be up in June. We'll be talking about the American Innovation Index. Until then, thanks everybody and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.